forecast work group will come to order, 8:05 a.m. For those of you who may not have seen the agenda is as follows: forecast format, budget drivers, forecast population process, forecast scenarios, assumption testing, forecast schedule, and accessibility. I expect that this will largely be the Nick and Amy show with guest appearances from Katie Blake and Jay Fundling. So forecast format, one of the things I noticed, Nick, was that the Division of Local Services, DOR, has a recommended format. Is that the format we're using, or did we decide to do something different?
No, we didn't use the DOR format. So the way this workbook lines up is with how we compile the budget for town meeting and how we look at the budget and share it from there with warrant committee. So we try to keep it generally in the same format. I don't know if Amy, if that's accurate. So
yeah, because I started it with that budget workbook that we used.
so that's the nature of the setup. It kind of matches the other way we show the budget, and rather than start tweaking too much. But that's why that is the way it is.
And the DLS model has the benefit of having linked workbooks or worksheets and updates on its own. Does our model do that?
Say that again?
So the DLS model has the benefit of having linked worksheets, so that when you enter data on the main worksheet, it updates the worksheets and vice versa. So if you update a worksheet for a particular part of the worksheet, it updates the main document.
Yes and no, but there's not like a summary input sheet. So like on the main expenditure sheet, there's a column where we change percentages based upon what line item it is, but that's not like linked to an overall page where so you'd have to change them on the line item. There's tabs that for like state aid, debt, different pieces of it that link in where there's more detail to that, how that number was derived. That makes sense?
Yeah, like the local receipts tab, the state aid tab, the debt tab funnel information back to either the summary page or to the expenditures tab. And that's where that data is pulling from. So you can look at our full debt service forecast on the debt service tab, but for the summary level on the expenditures tab, you're just gonna see a couple of years of it, and it all is consolidated there. So it functions somewhat similarly. We attempted to build this DOR version out in Medfield.
Yeah.
When I was there. It was a lot of inputs, and I don't know that it was super successful. I feel like it adds additional complexity maybe. But we've tried to kind of approach our workbook in a similar fashion to have more detail kind of buried on other tabs and pull that data forward in a summary fashion. If I think this is if folks look at this and prefer this kind of setup, it's something we can work towards probably for next year, as we'd have to assign that to somebody and start building it out. But in the meantime, the workbook we set up functions somewhat similarly, but not 100% the same.
Can I just add something that I'm not sure you even know? Years ago, probably more than 5, when Michael Dennehy was the town administrator, DLS or one of their groups kind of put a forecast together for Milton. I don't know if it was ever completed or not. I think that was like through a grant through like a free service. I don't know,
Yeah.
you might know what that would have been, but something exists somewhere in his files. It was,
That's a good
I was
point.
never really 100% involved with that. They kind of were on their own putting it together and would ask me questions. But I don't recall ever really getting the final product or it actually being put to use.
That's a good point. We should try to run that down. So Katie, have you looked at this format?
So I was just gonna ask, I didn't wanna interrupt the conversation, but I don't know, I'm lost.
So
Where are
in
we looking?
the meeting materials that Nick,
Was it sent? Email?
It's in the.
yeah, so Nick sent all of us meeting materials each time,
Sunday.
each week he sends them, and in there is the forecast that he and Amy have put together.
Okay. Do you have that?
Yeah, I'll
That
just
you
email
can
you
forward
the,
it to me?
yeah, I'll send you the link and I'll just.
This is all in that folder, right?
Yes, the FY 26 to 30 projection. That's what I saw.
Is it a Google Drive? Like, I just don't know
No,
that I
it's not
have
a
Excel
Google,
spreadsheet.
access
it's
to
the
it.
Microsoft
Okay.
360.
Okay.
The like where the meeting material folders, but I just sent you.
Thank you.
So the question, Katie, is if we ask the schools to build a model that might complement this,
Thank you, Ron.
Okay. Thank you.
Meeting materials. This goes to that folder.
Perfect.
so if we ask the schools to build a model that complements this using the DESI budget categories, is that something you think you could do? But I guess we should give you a little time to look at it.
Yeah, I'll find that. And then the format that you're talking about, is it revenue projections or is it expense?
It's both.
Both.
It's a, right,
But it's just general fund.
It's just general fund.
but I think what would complement all this work that Nick and Amy have done is if the schools had a model that would provide some feeder information. The format that they've built here doesn't really serve the schools particularly because as we talk about budget drivers, which we'll talk about in just a minute,
Mhm.
the budget drivers are a little different on the school side than on the town side.
Okay.
Obviously, they're related, but they're not the same.
We'll just put on the screen the differences. What we're talking about.
Yeah. We put that up, Nick?
So which one would you like to look at first?
The Excel fiscal year 26 to 30.
This is the one we had produced.
9/18/25.
I got it. Thank you.
And I think this DOR of what has completed.
Okay.
Comparison, so I'll just bring that to you.
Okay, thank you.
Katie, it's Catherine and I, you know,
It's C Blake or G Blake.
Jennifer
Is it
Starr
up
as
both
well.
ways?
That's
Yeah.
format we're talking about.
They both work.
That's good.
Nick,
So, I
Katie,
can't
she
deny.
does- she's-
C Blake at Milton, PS.
Similar or
It's a
aligned?
similar, but there's
Blake, relocation at Milton, PS. There you go. .org, yep. Thank you.
So just to explain how this functions, so the summary tab pulls together data on other tabs. The expenditures tab shows on a department by department basis at a summary level, so salary and wages. It coincides with how you would see the budget in the warrant in terms of order of the departments being shown and the lines that we show. And then for additional information, there's historical tabs in terms of free cash, local receipts, state aid receipts, state aid assessments, and then these funnel back to the other tabs. And then the debt shows the long-term debt forecast going out to, I guess, some long-term debt out to 2055 now. And then authorized not bonded is projects that have been approved by town meeting that we have not issued debt for yet as of, I don't know if did we update this yet after the August
That
issuance or the
was
September
10/17.
issuance?
No,
So
this
that,
was something I did for that,
Last
I
year, yeah.
think, for the bond issuance.
so that's the two different debt tabs. One is everything that updated is what has been issued. Authorized not bonded is projects that have been approved by town meeting, but we haven't necessarily brought the money in yet. So those projects are either incomplete, not started, or nearly complete, so just kind of in different areas of completion.
And those are from last fall when we put it together.
Do you have, so we could plug in something like, you know, the school to that, like in the future? Like we could play around with that if we, no, I'm not saying like today. But I'm saying like theoretically at
The
some
new
point.
school,
Yeah,
so in theory, yeah, we could add
like we could
lines
test
for it.
we could test that in the model.
Yes, we could add it. The other piece would be if we would show debt service for a new school in the debt tab, we would then come back to the summary tab to show our debt exclusions line as going up, because that would be presumably obviously a debt exclusion funded project, so
Got it.
it shouldn't have an impact on the operating budget otherwise, because it would only be approved if it was approved
Right,
as
it's like
exclusion.
totally separate,
But
yeah.
as, you know, here, looking at kind of what's on this list as examples, Laura Guile, we have a $400,000 debt appropriation, and there's a $1.6 million one as well. So right now, this forecast that is coming online in fiscal '27. However, we still don't have approval to build that project, so maybe that needs to come online in fiscal '28. So that has a direct impact on the operating budget because we're borrowing it within our levy.
Got it.
So that's how that would function. And what you'll see is a lot of these projects, the way our debt schedule is lined up, or in the way the projects have been reaching completion, they're hitting in '27 or '28. But that is kind of the run-of-the-mill capital projects funded with debt through the tax levy are on this tab. Larger debt exclusions, we didn't even work with
Yeah,
anyway.
that makes sense.
The only way it would make sense to, I guess, I think it'd be interesting to do that, to have a model in which you could project that out for any future, right, 2.5 override kind of capital expenditure. But there would probably need to be a tab that shows what the tax, right, like almost the tax implication of the override that y'all did last year, showing what that would be kind of over the projected timeframe.
And likely the Atherton Fire Station will be moving forward in the next year and a half. That is a debt exclusion project that we could show that on here, but it wouldn't, again, would be debt excluded rather than hitting the general levy.
Got it.
I just wanna point one thing out not related to that. When you look at 23, there's a formula error. I just can't fix it on here because it's read only.
When you look at what,
Column D on summary tab, if you go all the way down to row 45, the projected excess, although it would be nice that it was really 14.8, it's not. This line 43 is pulling in from the wrong year. So I fixed that on the one on my my drive, but this is read only, so I can, Nick or I can fix that. Just, I didn't want you to think that.
So-
I didn't know there was a mistake there.
What's the actual figure?
It's
yeah,
Hands,
where
right?
should it be pulling from? G?
yeah, G260, which actually, that doesn't look right either. It's, I think everything might, I just have to it's just pulling from the wrong year. Pulling from F. Yeah, I'll have to look at it.
To jump back to your point, if I may, on the schools.
Yeah.
The two pieces of information that it seems like would be, I mean, again, I think the schools we wanna do have similar 5-year projections to your point, but in terms of informing this document, you have the line under the expenditures for the schools, right, which is salary, sorry, pulling it up, yeah, salary in general. I'm not sure what that row 204 is, where it only has something under column G. So so maybe it's nothing.
Where are you, Mark?
I'm sorry, I'm on the expenditure tab.
That was some one-time money way back in a prior year.
Okay.
The 589,808.
Okay, so the two pieces are what our salary projections are and what our general expense projections are. That's a level of detail. Blue Hills, y'all project that? Is that something that we support with?
Yeah, usually, like Katie helped us with that last year. Because it's based on the number of students you think are gonna be there and what their budget's gonna go up. So that one's one of those that usually comes in late in the budget process.
Yeah, but in terms of creating some type of 5-year projection model for that.
You can't, because look at the last 3 years, 866, almost 1.1 million, 813, now 954. So it fluctuates so much year to year based on the number of students there. And then the other thing, this has been a big fight up at Beacon Hill and others, is they've changed the lottery process for they've changed the application process to get into Vokes, where it had been an application based and the Vogue schools had latitude to reject applicants. Now it's gone to more of a straight lottery. So they think that will lead to more fluctuation, even greater fluctuation year over year. So it's really hard to predict it. I don't know a good answer there, other than trying to just be really conservative on it and hope every year it comes in under what we estimate. So we plugged a 7.5 a year based on the fiscal 26 budget going forward, but it could be much lower than that. We really don't know. And they don't provide their following year enrollment until February, March. So that's one of the last pieces that go into the budget as a final number.
And then is there information related to the capital, both bonded and non-bonded, for the 5-year projections that y'all are needing from the schools, or is that really not based upon kind of town need? It's more just based upon, again, revenue forecasts and what y'all know y'all can carry under your.
I think we put in an assumption there that that it wouldn't go down, like we try to at least keep it level. Didn't we do something like that?
So for free cash capital, we don't assume anything. We're not assuming free cash as a revenue source. We're not assuming free cash being spent on capital in the budget at all. It's kind of a separate path. So in terms of debt funded capital, what this workbook is showing today is issued debt plus our forecast for authorized and unissued. And then in 29 and 30, it anticipates additional coming on to at least keep debt service at least level. So it doesn't say there's gonna be 5 projects that we're gonna do. It just says, here's the amount of money that we expect to use on debt service in those years. In terms of the capital plan more broadly, we have requests from all departments, including consolidated facilities for both town and schools, that showed their expected requests from 27 to 31 now. So we have that information. However, that is, I don't wanna call it a wish list, but it's everything they would like to do.
Yeah.
Rather than a more realistic expectation of what we can actually afford. So that's the information we have on the capital side. We have it, but it's more of a wish list than an actual realistic expectation of what we can afford on an annual basis out of the capital piece.
Yeah, I hear that, so I guess to answer my question is it's more driven on expected revenue, not on, requested projects. I still think somehow within this financial forecast, taking that 5-year projection from consolidated facility from the capital requests and putting that against what our expected revenue is for the capital needs, to just see, I mean, we are underfunding kind of capital needs, have been for a while, at least being able to be clear about that, because that can lead to long-term issues if we're not addressing kind of capital needs within the town. So I think at least having some visibility into that to say like, how far are we off based upon the requests, the capital requests from the department's consolidated facilities.
Mark, you talking about debt funded capital?
I'm talking about, again, it's a little bit of both. I mean, they don't separate out, in Tom comes in and presents the school's capital thing, he's not separating out what is debt and non-debt capital. That's really left,
Right.
point
And I think the capital improvement planning committee makes a judgment, and the select board about which capital can be funded through free cash or other sources, and which capital should be debt funded. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, I think some of that is based upon what, life.
Useful life and the cost of it, right?
I think from my perspective too, in building a capital plan, I don't know that I ever, and this was just me, had visibility into kind of like those numbers of how the debt, what the 5-year projection was for the debt. And so, but I do think that it's really helpful to see that, because we do work through the process of creating that 5-year plan. And then sometimes assigning projects to certain fiscal years, we try to prioritize them, but I think just having a sense of the reality of what the funding may look like may be helpful.
Sure.
In that process. I think it's helpful for us too to try to like just organize our requests in a way that we're not getting frustrated because it's like, well, we keep requesting it and it's not getting funded.
Yeah, and I think this gets a little bit to something that we'll be talking about later with the forecast scenarios. In this forecast, we're showing no free cash in a year for the next 5 years. And for some purposes, that's prudent. But I think for a 5-year forecast, we want to look at what's realistic. And what's realistic is we expect to have a couple $1 million of free cash every year. So for, not for budgeting for next year or anything, but for a 5-year long-term forecast, I think it's appropriate to assume we'll have several $1 million of free cash every year. And how are we going to allocate that? Maybe I just opened up a bigger can of worms, but I really think that's...
Yeah, you have. So that,
Okay.
that raises a question, Jay, about a higher level question about whether we want to be ultra conservative on the revenue projection and assumption side, and just as conservative in assuming expenditures and things that could go wrong. So free cash is something that is not guaranteed, and it's entirely dependent, as you well know, on what happens during the budget year, how much money departments spend, and so on. So I think it's prudent to not suggest or project that there will be free cash. It should be a pleasant surprise each year, but obviously that's a select board and warrant committee and town administrator discussion.
Yeah, and when you said pleasant surprise each year, it should be a pleasant surprise each year. There's a difference between planning for next year's budget and looking out 5 years. And I think it's, I think I feel very strongly that if we're making a long-term plan, it should be a little bit realistic. And when you said pleasant surprise, all surprises are bad. Good surprises are bad. Bad surprises are bad. So I think we want to say, if we have a couple $1 million of free cash every year, what do we do with it?
Right, but the question is, should we assume that every year we will have this amount of free cash? Amy?
So this has been drilled into my head since day one I stepped into my role with the town. There is no free cash unless it's certified by the Department of Revenue.
Right.
So to project it forward.
Which happens after the budget year.
Correct. And so right now we have free cash because it was certified by the DOR. We used 60, no, what did we use? 60 grand for the election. More than likely, we're gonna appropriate that in May to one-time capital, things like that. But if we don't, it goes back to zero.
Right.
Until it's certified at the end of June of '26, so.
And I think that's prudent for an individual year. But for looking at,
Jay, let Amy finish, will you?
okay, sorry. I'm not in the room and I can't read the body language.
So our approach to this has been, if there's free cash, it will be used for capital or one-time items, and this is an operating budget forecast, so we didn't roll it in.
Right. I agree.
So no free cash unless it's certified and unappropriated.
Jay,
Resets to zero.
introduce our new,
Sure. Devin is with us in the Milton Public Schools from Harvard University. He's with me for the year. We'd like to introduce Devin to the group. This is the Budget Committee Commission for the Town of Milton.
Welcome.
We just came from the Collycott School when we met the staff this morning, and so we came over here together. That's why I was late, so I apologize.
Jay? Jay,
Yes?
did you have something else to add?
Oh, no, I think I've said what I wanted to say. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting.
All right. Nick, can you pull up the forecast summary sheet? That's with the revenue forecast and the expenditure forecast. So we want to talk about budget drivers, and this gets us to assumptions as well. And similarly, Katie, the ask would be, could the schools develop both a similar format and a similar list of, I wouldn't call them revenue forecast in the school's case, probably funding forecast and expenditure forecast, but you'll see what I'm talking about.
We want, sorry.
This one.
Oh, that sheet, okay, sorry. One thing I just wanna point out is that our new growth was, certified by the Department of Revenue and the Board of Assessors at just shy of 1.5 million. So, if we plug that in for this year, it's, $500,000 positive. That then grows each year. So just to show you, we had balanced it before, you add the $500,000 of new growth this year, not changing any of the underlying other assumptions. Now there's about $500,000 each year moving forward that hadn't yet been incorporated into the debt model or into the forecasting model. So that's just an additional factor I just wanted to flag as our $1 million forecast for new growth for fiscal '26 ended up being conservative. We're closer to 1.5 million. So that's good news. And then what we'd want to be cautious of is going forward is really looking at whether our $1 million forecast each year is still okay, as things seem to be starting to slow down. So that's just something to keep in mind. So flipping back over to the forecast summary.
Nick, can I ask a question on,
Yes.
so we're talking about a few items that we estimate. What's our guideline on those estimations? You were talking about 7.5, if we're doing new growth,
Right, so that's,
is that where we're going?
yeah, that's where we're
All
going.
right,
Yeah, this spells some of that out. So I'll just run down kind of in order as a summary level. So for the tax levy, we assume we would tax at the max that we are allowed to under the state law.
So Nick, and listen, so I wanted to address exactly the question you're asking. So for each of these, I want to test these assumptions a little bit. Does this make sense? Is this too conservative? Is this assume too much? So let's just go one by one as Nick was going.
Tax levy is pretty easy there.
Yeah.
We assume we do the max. New growth, like I was just saying, for '26, we had been at $1 million. The last 3 to 4 years, we've been close to 1.2 to 1.3 million, so we've been well in excess of the million. It's driven additions, renovations going along to houses across Milton. There has been new growth in terms of new construction of larger projects, Walcott Woods, 131 Elliott. Now the 40Bs are starting to slowly come online, 711 Randolph Ave, the Ice House on the Blue Hills Parkway, 936 Brush Hill, those are buildings. Ice House is being sold now, so that is all captioned in '26, and there won't be new forward. Those other projects will continue to add a little bit of new growth. The other ones are starting to hit construction. So while we feel we'll have a strong baseline. $1 million is a departure from what the history has been. And I'll show a longer history that shows that has been different. For debt exclusions, we don't assume any change.
Just one question on new growth. So right now we're projecting out to 2030. Are you confident that that assumption holds through 2030?
I don't know. I think it may make sense to back off that a little bit. I think for 27, and I'll check with the assessors, I think we feel okay on 27. It's more maybe 28, 29, 30 from there.
Is there any other mechanism by which that can inform that 5-year projection other than just a number of projects that like we know are permanent, like is there any kind of metric by which we can do some type of calculation, say like, hey, we know we have $10 million worth of permanent projects and so therefore we can project this, or we have less than that and we can project that.
For like the immediate coming up year, we can, because it's capturing growth that's ongoing now.
Yeah.
So we can see, it's now November, building permits have stayed steady, and also 582 Blueville Ave, which is another 40B, 84 units. They just paid their permit fee of, $450,000. They have their building permit, so we can account in 27 and 28 and 29 for that to slowly come online.
Yep.
It's really the elements that we don't know is like the kind of run-of-the-mill addition renovations that make up a big component of the growth. Because there's small increases, but there have been a lot of them. And then the other element, which is about a third to a quarter of the new growth, has been personal property growth, which is the utilities. So again, Grid and Eversource have to do work as part of their regular maintenance, work in progress on an annual basis. But if that were to slow, that's a little bit out of our hand, and there's not really a way to say what they'll be doing in 28 other than to just estimate.
So it's better to kind of use the average of the last, because you've previously kind of given us that new growth chart, right? And so it's like we've been around above $800,000 for the last 8 years. So it looks like that was kind of the assumption last year document. Like, is that like a more historical assumption we used?
Yeah, but we were willing to revise it upwards because, now we're at 1.2, then 1.3, this year we're 1.5. So then to be using 800, does that look like an outlier on the low side? And we're being overly conservative on that. So I think it's finding a good middle ground there.
Yeah, I think to Jay's point though, there's the difference of the 1 year forecast versus the 5 year.
Right.
And so being a little bit more conservative on the 5 year forecast, I think is.
And Nick, an economic downturn would have an impact on new growth.
For sure, right. Those projects just won't happen. We have that baseline of the 40Bs are under construction. We assume folks won't walk away from those when they're, we have shells of buildings, we have steel in ground, but am I gonna do my kitchen renovation? Am I gonna add on the bedroom? That's where we might see the change.
Out loud too, just to be explicit, that this kind of modification of the 5-year plan should be done every year.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So we should reserve the right to say that this is what it looks like this year, then we'll go backwards again and get the averages based on the actuals, and then we'll do it again, because you'll have better sight lines every year. So this should be a moving document annually that continues to project out 5 years.
And John, before you guys arrived, I asked Mark and Katie whether they could build a companion document on the school side that might be driven by the DESI budget categories, and so that similarly they would have projections as well as a set of assumptions, not necessarily revenue, but funding forecast and expenditure forecast.
From an expenditure side, not a revenue side.
Yeah.
We actually worked on the assumptions the other day, some assumptions the other day.
So I guess that would just be, as a follow-up to that would be my question, is that like going through these, is there a change between the assumptions that are made for year 1 versus the assumptions that are made for year 5? Because when we go through the process of building out the school department budget, some of the expenditures are based off of unknowns, so we do have to factor in assumptions for inflation, but many of the things that we budget for, we know for the upcoming year. I would know them for the upcoming year. I may not necessarily know them for years 3, 4, and 5.
Right, and that's the challenge of financial planning in general.
That's why you update it every year.
Yeah, exactly.
So every year that goes out is more.
It gets less,
lack
exactly,
of
it gets less accurate the further.
But for the short term, like 2027, would you not go up to like 1.3 or something, since that's been?
Probably not, cause I will speak to the assessors in the building department and get a sense, but we've been paying particular attention to some of those development projects to make sure we capture that growth each successive year, which hasn't been something we've necessarily done in the past. So for example, for 7-Eleven Randolph Ave, we've captured a lot of that growth already. So there's gonna be much less growth next year on that project because we've got it this year rather than waiting to next year. So that's kind of some of the nuances that might affect next year. It's better to have it this year because then it goes into the base. We're adding 2.5% onto it for each successive year going on.
And that's another one that we update continuously not continuously, but through the budget process. We'll go in now for 27 with an estimate, but we'll check with the assessors when it gets closer to May to see if there's any
less,
update.
yes.
And if there are, then we'll
can make
adjust accordingly.
Yeah.
So it's better to go in conservative from the start than to have to reduce it after we're balanced.
You'll have way more information about slide 27 than the other ones. I think my personal interest is just like, what is the assumption we are making for the projection for the year 3 to year 5?
Yeah.
And so I guess I see we just at this point just have a number. And I guess my push would be say like, can we base that number in something? And say, hey, we're taking the average of the last 5 years, where maybe we think there's been too much of a bell curve. We've had a lot of growth that we don't expect in the future. So we say, average the last 10 years, 7 years, like whatever that metric is that kind of makes us feel like this is a sustainable number. It might fluctuate on a year-to-year basis, but the point of a 5-year plan is like, do we feel good about how this kind of trends over that period of time?
Right, and to your point, the supporting assumptions might be different for each of these items.
Yes.
I'm gonna call an audible because I wanna continue going through each one of these, but Megan's gonna leave in about 5 minutes, and one of the reasons that she joined this was to talk about scenarios. She's got some ideas about scenarios, so that's a little further down on the agenda, but let's talk about scenarios. Now, you guys did do 3 scenarios, but what was your thinking?
You already did. Well, so yeah, I mean, I think developing scenarios is probably, an hour to a couple of hours worth of work, but down the road, as we process some of this, we could think about what are, like in the 5 to 10 year range, like what are the three plausible scenarios based on the 3 or 4 or 5 different drivers that we're seeing on the budget. So, potential slowdown in the economy, potential increase in new families coming to town, like you could think of factors such as that and then develop a couple of different scenarios based on like the confluence of those drivers to help try to understand or plug in factors to the model that would reflect those scenarios coming to fruition. And then like it's basically a thought exercise, right? That if we had like scenario A, which might be the economy crashes and we have no new families or no new people coming to Milton, like housing prices drop, or I haven't necessarily thought through like exact potential scenarios, and it's a
I think what you're talking
collective
about-
experiment,
I think we
right?
have things in the pipeline that can become pieces of scenarios. We have
Yeah.
data that we can use if we have something that looks like 08,
Yeah,
what were our expenditures there? If we had that happen again, what would that look like for us? If we had, I think we have the average of new homes that are being built.
right.
If we see that goes up by, if it doubles, right, or if it falls a bit, and then, you know, do we have any state or federal funding that we get? If there's a massive cut. And
Exactly.
then,
Thank you, Winston.
are we?
That was on the tip of my tongue and I was like, I
Also
don't know
for
what the next
projecting
one.
like new school building and
Yeah.
solutions as well.
Aren't those scenarios though all things we're just playing with as relates to the forecast of
Yeah.
these assumptions?
So yeah, you would
Yes.
be able to then use this model to then like play around with.
Yeah.
You know, what factors would you plug in to see, and then, you know, we could have slightly more realistic conversations about, you know, can we afford a new school, or is it a good idea to go forward with a new school if we see the rate of preschoolers at this level or whatever? You know what I mean? Like, what does that actually spell out 10 to 15 years down the road or 20 years down the road?
You know, maybe that starts with the things that are most realistic for us right now. like
Yeah.
the increase in insurance and all those things that we've spoken about.
Yes.
Those are things that are probably most pressing for us, is like if we go to 18%, 19%.
And I can come prepared. I mean, we do this at the DOT. We did it, you know, for the Trump administration, like trying to understand, you know, possible scenarios, like if he was cutting money to eds and meds, et cetera, and, you know, just other factors. But there's a framework that can be used. It's like plug and play.
You'll share that with us.
Yeah. Yep.
Katie?
So I guess, I think it would be helpful, but I think I'm just kind of getting stuck on, like, we have a conversation about kind of financial policy and then having conversations about projections. And I think that they very much go hand in hand. And I think some of the projections need to be tied to the policies, so kind of without having those policies. Because some of those scenarios are gonna be different depending on if you have a stabilization fund.
Right.
If you have
Yeah.
ways to be able to account, and that's why we have rainy day funds, right?
Yeah.
And so I just think that and I'm very much thinking from like the school department side of like, how can I do this and show you something like that? But I think that there's also a few other pieces that we would have to
Absolutely.
work on.
Yeah.
To make sure that we're not just saying like, all right, we're just gonna assume 5%, because that's
Right.
easy.
Right.
And
One
of the things we did last week, Katie, was look briefly at, there was quite a bit of feedback on the policies.
Right.
A number of people submitted the comments. Nick was going to create a document that incorporates all those, and then we'll finalize that. And I think Winston and Megan said that they'd like to have those voted on by the select board sometime in December. So
Yeah.
you're right, we should have those foundational policies in place before the end of the year.
I just think any changes to forecast, just again, I can only speak from the school department side. Any changes that we potentially would make to the forecasts that we're using, especially if they're not based off of historical actuals, because the history is what we know that's what happened, right? So that's our data. But it would very much be driven by any of those stabilization funds or financial policies that we have in place.
Right, John?
I only wanted to go back to, and I think long range, and I think scenarios, there's certain fixed things that you still have to do despite the scenario, so.
Right, that you're
Yeah.
legally required.
Yeah, from an operating standpoint, but I also think about the fixed things that might, and I missed the capital planning conversation, so I apologize if I'm repeating what's been discussed. Capital planning with money attached to it, or forecasted money attached to it, to know that you're gonna get things done. Did we talk about that? Because I don't know if there's a budget, capital planning strategic plan where we're going to do this. been part of teams where we actually tried to spell out what the capital planning projects would cost. I think, Mark, you were alluding to this. We know that the HVAC on the schools is X amount of years old. And we should anticipate, and this was part of the conversations we had a long time ago. What are we gonna do? Because all these things are gonna age out at the same time. All these roofs, all these HVAC systems, all these things will start to deteriorate. And I'm sure that that's gonna be within other buildings across the town. So starting to think about those capital things in a way where we might wanna attach money to that plan, or at least forecast dollars that match up with things that have to happen. So if we have a bad economy and things go down, but if the HVAC's not working, you still have to fix certain things even though they're, so just, I think that what towns have figured out sometimes is that you spend more on maintenance if you don't actually have a good capital planning plan.
Right.
Because all of a sudden you're starting to spend your operating to put Band-Aids on the thing that if you had just planned to fix at a certain increment of time, that were relatively projectable, for lack of a better term, and, you know, to think that way. I don't know if the capital committee has that thinking or mission.
That's an excellent point.
Because then it drains now it starts to drain your revolving, your operational costs go up for maintaining. And then that strikes with also a hit in the economy, and all of a sudden, things happen differently. So you can't control everything, but I'm just trying to say it out loud that might be a thought.
I totally agree, John. I think that's, in my mind, that's like one of those assumptions, right, around what is the debt we can take out for capital, right? What is the assumption of using free cash or using operating fund? Like how much of the operating budget are we pushing towards capital? And like, you know, what are those assumptions within these 5-year forecasts? And maybe we assume nothing, and that's why I also think, you know, taking the 5-year projections from the departments in terms of their capital needs against what we're actually going to be, we are projecting a budget for addressing those needs and seeing what that gap is and seeing if that's a gap we can live with or if that's concerning and we need to adjust some other kind of projections and assumptions within this model to push more funding towards capital needs, because town just needs to do that, or not, but at least we're going in it with eyes wide open of like, what is the concern? But Jay has had his hand up for a while.
Just one point. I think that, I know the town has a capital plan, and I think the schools has a capital plan, but I like the idea of a strategic capital plan that's a little different. Because in my day job, I've got a client that's one of the largest employers in the state who suddenly recognized that deferred maintenance and the maintenance they've deferred is a crisis. And now you've got to do some things that perhaps you wouldn't have had to do if you did careful planning. Jay? You have your hand up?
Yes. Back to the sort of back to the scenario testing.
Yeah.
I think there's this sort of scenarios that Megan was talking about, like let's say we have a recession in 3 years. And then I think my mind was more along like Winston's mind, which was like, let's say health insurance is 9% instead of 8% per year. Either way, I think what would really help is if we had, there's a lot I like about the current projection spreadsheet, but I think it's sometimes hard to use. And I think if we had a second summary tab, we've got a summary tab now, a different summary tab that had just the important parts of the income and the important parts of the expenditures split out, and maybe the assumptions, you know, percentage, salary increase, et cetera, maybe even on that tab, so we could change, you know, each of us would have a functioning spreadsheet where we could say, if we change salary increases from 3% to 3.5%, let's see what that does. I've tried and failed to make such a summary tab on this spreadsheet, so I think I need to give up and work directly with Amy and Nick. But I think that would be very useful.
Yeah, I that's exactly what that's my dream, that you have this spreadsheet where if you change a certain assumption, then it updates the sheet. But yeah, I think that's right. And I think that idea of maybe a second summary tab where those particular, where those assumptions that are major budget drivers might reside. That might be a good idea.
Yes. yeah, major budget drivers. Like if we look at the summary tab now, we've got $5,000 for the police leash law. Well, that's, I don't want that to not be in the budget, but if I'm looking at a summary tab, I don't want to see that line. I want to see the big lines.
Nick and Amy, I'm surprised that in 2025, we're still doing this on Excel. Is there software that handles this for municipalities?
I have,
All these scenarios sounds like things we should be entering into some AI co-pilot that goes along instead of us doing version control on an Excel sheet.
I have a quote, it's like 30 grand a year.
Approved.
There you go.
It feels good to be the boss.
Yeah, it's ClearGov, OpenGov, all these kind of companies that are in this market have similar tools that work different ways, that have a capital planning module, has an operating budget module, produces digital budget books. So we've been looking at pricing for that. I think it would be nice because it would help with this, but also just kind of the way we do the budget internally, where we're updating Excel workbooks kind of each year. All of that would just be done. So they're nice tools. I know communities that use them, that like them, but it just adds a cost for sure.
I think we should bring that to the board.
A lot of those should do forecast, help you with forecasting.
Yeah, for sure. And they then they have additional modules specifically for HR and position control.
And the school would have access to, right?
Yes, yeah. It would be a townwide system, but I actually don't know how those tie in. I didn't ask that question.
I think they do have
Okay.
separate, because I've talked to a different,
Yeah.
I think it was ClearGov,
Okay,
that they have a school module that you can use.
so that might add to the cost, but
I'll bring this up now because I haven't mentioned it to both of you guys, but I think it would be helpful, and if you had that software, doing it on a month-to-month basis, and it would do it for you. It would take a lot of the, it would take a lot of the work from you, make it a lot easier, and you could have, it would budget for you on a monthly basis because there's so much seasonality in the town with the schools and everything else on what the expenses are. And each department could just look at it on their own, like each principal or consolidated facilities could just look at their spreadsheet and see where they are in the year as they're going, when it should actually be a lot more accurate. Strongly recommend, I'd be a strong advocate for that.
I just don't know if the software that we're talking about from the school side, and we talked about this a lot on Monday night, 81% of our budget is salaries. And the system that we currently use, the accounting system, doesn't encumber salaries. So there isn't that outstanding projection amount in the accounting system. I don't know if this new budgeting software would have that. I haven't seen it yet, so.
It probably would, I gotta believe it would.
Yeah.
Software has it, it just isn't set up. It was never set up.
I'm sorry, I've got to drop off for a 9:00 call, but I can say, from what I heard on the warrant committee last year, there's an appetite for what Nick just said. Whether it's Nick finding $30,000 in the budget or the warrant committee finding that in the budget, I think there's an appetite for that. So I strongly encourage looking into that, but I've got to drop off. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jay.
Make your life a lot easier.
It's just a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I think the other
Well-
component, to put this in context, is this would be helping do the budget in terms of our general ledger AP modules. That's a separate system that is also kind of end of life. And then we have nothing at all on the HR front in terms of employee benefits, onboarding, time and attendance. So we are in a couple decades behind perhaps in a couple elements. So while we would agree on the budget software, our priorities are probably more pushing on the HR, payroll, and then AP and general ledger stuff. So this is a good conversation.
Is that in terms of a software upgrade for both of those?
Yeah, for all of it, so.
I would say that becomes a bigger conversation for the board of us to talk about what's the cost and timeline for us upgrading both of these. I don't know if we need to make a choice of either or. Saying that we're a couple decades behind is concerning, and I think coming out of just the time that we're all spending here, going through the sheets, there's value in just removing that.
Okay. That's helpful. We'll take that positive feedback.
Well, it's not just feedback, young man, it's an opening.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say direction too.
I'd be back, yeah.
When the money's there, we'll just do it
I'll be back with a
all.
proposal next week.
I will say Needham just did this for their general ledger and other items. It was $2 million, so I don't wanna
For the
undersell.
One time,
Financial
2
package.
million, and then probably like 100 or so a
including
year.
HR.
Yeah, everything.
So,
That's why we gotta need that number, have that discussion.
so
It is
kind of
jumped to
related to this,
2
I
million.
think the other scenario that we haven't focused on and that I feel like I just need to put out there is this is level service rollover and doesn't consider
Right.
any needs. And so we probably at a minimum need 2, right? If we just roll it over as is with known cost increases, but what if
Well, I think that's
we
an
need
assumption.
this?
Right, I think that's, you build that in as assumption line of, right, what additional, I don't know exactly how you do it, if that's under salaries, because you're assuming 2.5 is just the rollover, and if you're increasing that more, maybe that's the addition of new positions, or if like there's actually a position
An
number.
FTE line, yeah.
And we're like saying, here's what our current position numbers are, here's a projection of we're adding 5 like, we can make those assumptions within kind of, again, the scenario planning, but building that into kind of the forecast model of, we're forecasting that we're not adding any new positions, and this is what it is, or we're forecasting that between the town or the schools, or maybe you separate those forecasts, that we're adding 5 positions, something like that, then helps kind of project those.
Yeah, I think as part of the scenarios, you'd have a no growth budget, 2% growth budget, a 5% growth budget, a minus 5% budget. I mean, that, and we'll get to this, the other, because I want to talk about what responsibility we have, the town has for not only controlling spending, but controlling the rate of growth. And I think that's something that we'll have to build into these forecasts at some point.
Can you say more of that, the rate of growth?
So, and I mentioned this a little bit last week, that if we've got a budget, in this case, the school's budget, if the rollover budget is growing at 9%, do we have any obligation to try to figure out how to get that growth rate down? And if we can, that should free up not only resources for the schools, but it should free up resources for the other town departments, so that everybody benefits, but that's not an easy challenge. So that's just one scenario would be, what are the measures we have to take to affect that outcome?
But I think from so my head's in 2 spots. One is FY '27, what are the assumptions that we're all making? Because Katie and I just had a meeting where we decided to list the assumptions on the whiteboard to get ready for. But from a forecasting standpoint, and I know it would be nice to have a software to do this, but if we're going through a scenario where all this housing comes online, because it will, then the enrollment will go up by X. So now you're cutting it, now you're making tabs, right? There's a scenario where the economy stays good, these units come online, there's an anticipation of more families moving in, there's an anticipation of higher school enrollment. And so we should make an automatic assumption that whatever is impacted, we just click where we think that the assumption will be for potential costs. That's that scenario.
Right.
And there's another tab that goes through, these things fall apart, the economy goes down, they stay shells of buildings, they don't complete the projects, tax revenue goes, enrollment stays stagnant, so I'm assuming, I'm not a spreadsheet person, have never had one done in my life, so I apologize. And then each tab just represents a change as you're looking at yourselves, so I'm assuming that's a very big manual lift for Amy and Nick, but is that what people are thinking in their minds as a way to demonstrate scenarios?
And I think that's-
You would just walk these down, you describe them differently based on what you think the scenario would be, and then you have to adjust the numbers connected to them
Right.
accordingly.
And I think that's Winston's point, that there's got to be software that makes that easier so that you can change. So if you get 100 more students, that's one scenario. If you get 50 more students, so that you don't have to do that manually each time, then you can plug that in.
Yeah.
And there's an
You
automatic.
can look at it, you clicked it, yeah.
Well,
Just a quick question, 'cause I know you wanted to look at this, the one we're looking at now. Is there anything on this that we think we would change percentage-wise in terms of these assumptions?
yes. And I think we're out of time, but that's I have some notes about things that, I just wanted to talk through a little bit. So, so I'm thinking we probably need another meeting sometime soon. Cause I'd just like to finish going through these lists, but my answer would be yes. There are a number of instances here where I'd like to challenge the assumption a little bit.
Something we can do comments in between our next meeting? Maybe just to have yours,
I can certainly articulate what my questions are,
to
yes.
see what you.
And then maybe we can prep prior to that to identify where to kind of focus the conversation.
Yeah.
I do think, to your point, that an element of this needs to be just kind of getting to a consensus on what we want to say for 27 as we
Right.
continue to work out 28 and beyond.
I just have a general question on the assumptions for staffing, right? Just the two, because it's the 2.5% for salaries. And wasn't there another, but the collective bargaining set aside, is that the assumption of the increase in collective bargaining beyond just the 2.5% increase?
So the way this works is the 2.5 on salaries is hitting all the salary lines on the expenditures tab. The general expenses 3% hitting all the general expenses lines on that expenditure tab. Collective bargaining set aside is what we appropriate on the town staff side into a separate line item in the budget for a collective bargaining set aside, is because that's a separate line item. So that is $500 something thousand for fiscal 26, assuming that whole chunk of money will then increase by 2.5% a year thereafter. So it assumes those union agreements will be in that range of 2.5% each year following on, but it doesn't contemplate schools. I know you budget that within your own budget, so that's just the town side, and I'll add a note just to clarify that.
Can I ask a clarifying
Yeah.
question? So if we're automatically assuming a 2.5% increase on the base salary, that's an annual 2.5%?
Yeah.
And then the 2.5% on top of that, is that the juice that you would use to make that 2.5 go up to 3.25 if that's what you bargain? Annually? Is that what that means? I'm not sure how the collect, because the set aside, so we have the same thing, right? So we're forecasting next year with everybody moving steps and lanes. So where there'll be, that's mandated by law. And then we have a set aside, we'll set aside money for what we anticipate the collective bargaining increase to be. But that's a 1 year, because then it gets built on the base. And there's no set aside in non-contractually negotiation years. Does that make sense? Because after we settle the contract, the next 3 fiscal years are laid out. You know exactly what your percentage on the school side. We'll just bake in what it is for the teachers, what it is for the UNT, what it is for ASME. So every 3 years we do a set aside, but we don't have to do it every annual. Is that correct?
Correct.
So I'm just wondering, because that's a healthy line to have in there to help mitigate what you negotiate.
Yeah, the reason it's in there now is for that reason explicitly, is because all the contracts are up. So in fiscal 26, we didn't budget within departmental budgets for any kind of costs
Correct.
or union increase. It was budgeted essentially in this collective bargaining set aside. In a perfect scenario, that would be a 0 for 27, and then the cost would be allocated to all the departments from there.
Correct.
However, we've not made a lot of progress, so most likely there will be another set aside for 27. That'll be 26 plus 27. And that contemplates that happening each year. The other element is, again, we didn't really, just to again set kind of what the foundation of this forecast was. It was, if our revenues are X, how much can our costs go up to meet the revenue? It wasn't, if our expenditures are X and our revenues are Y, how much money do we need? So this wasn't saying we expect salaries only to go up by 2.5% a year. It was more kind of a flip side
Revenue driven.
analysis. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing with that, on the salaries, at least on the town side, is that 2.5 covers steps as well.
Yeah.
Steps and lanes on the
Steps
school
and
side.
lanes
And
is roughly the
COLA.
2.5, yeah. And the COLA,
Well, the COLA is kind of in the set aside,
that's correct, yeah.
but that 2.5 would be any changes in personnel steps or
Yep.
whatever.
So that'll.
Yeah, but the collective bargaining set aside is the COLA increase through the collective bargaining. And then you have to set the 2.5 for salaries is 7 lane change, and so like between those two, that is all of your salary increases. That was the piece I was wondering, cause
Okay.
within those two pieces, keeping that to 2.5%, I don't think it's a reasonable assumption. It at least hasn't been 2 years in the past data I've seen. I haven't seen that keep to 2.5%.
We met with one department this week and their salary budget is going up 0.5% without the COLA and stuff. So there are, depending on the departments and where their
Yeah,
employees
what their
are and the
scales
scales, so like,
Yeah.
that's an example of, now we're gonna be under in that department, but another department might be at 3% because they have people lower on the totem pole, that's just.
Okay, so, committee member, work group member homework, look at, the sheet that's called financial forecast summary and materials that Nick sent. Send any questions, comments, recommendations that you might have to Nick and Amy and pick this up at our next meeting. This was excellent, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thanks for doing that. When's the next meeting, by the way?
Don't know yet, but
Next Friday, right?
Next episode is policy.
Are we next Friday?
I think we've got a,